one thing for me, which is to answer the question that I've put on the first slide. And I will come back to it at the end of the presentation. So I'm just looking for one word that you can write into the chat box that represents trust for you.
On the chat, yeah?
Yeah.
Does Google know?
In one word. Oh my
Just
God.
one word, or a phrase if you can't come up with a word. Okay. So, good morning. My name is Sharon, as you know, and I've spent the last 19 years living abroad. My background is originally financial services, coaching, teaching, and my journey of living abroad has brought me to this place of intercultural consulting and coaching. So what I'd like to focus on today is how we build trust. And I think it's really important to remember that this is how 2020 started off. But this is actually what it looks like right now. And I think that never before has there been a moment when being able to build trust, not just with our clients in our own home countries, but in our overseas market has been more important. So the challenge is not only customer retention nowadays, but also getting new customers. So why does trust matter to our customers? So according to Price Waterhouse, 1 in 3 customers will walk away because of a bad experience from a brand that they actually love. Speed and convenience and helpful, friendly service is really important. In fact, it rates over 70% for each of those aspects. Only 46% of us are getting it right when it comes to our customer service. And 82% of customers feel that the human interaction is really important. So why does trust matter for you? I had an Italian client who was going to America to sign some contracts. And he went there, they immediately got down to business. They spent 2 days working through the agenda and the contract. And on the second evening, I rang them to see how things were going. And he said to me, Sharon, they're very efficient. We spend the whole day working. We don't even go out for lunch. We get sandwiches in. And then in the evening, we go back to our hotel rooms and they go home. And he said, I don't know if I can trust them. And when I asked him why, he said, because I don't have a sense of who they are. Because the thing is that how we build trust varies from culture to culture. So there are 3 key aspects to building trust. The first one is empathy. And empathy is, if I'm convinced that you are genuine, I will trust you. If I'm convinced of the rigor of your logic and how you communicate, I will trust you. If I believe you're authentic, I will trust you. And when we have all 3, we have trust. But if one of those is even a little bit shaky or missing, then trust is broken. So by understanding the loops or understanding where on the triangle our trust is shaky, we can understand how we can reinforce that trust and build it in order to connect with our customers or our teams. So let's have a quick look at culture. So we all belong to different groups, and be it from national to professional, from your organization to social. But we're the same person when we're within each of those groups. However, what we do is we modify our behavior. In one group, I could be the life and soul of the party, and another group, I'm serious, I listen attentively, I'm very professional. So we don't realize it, but we actually modify our behavior all of the time. So these multiple groups and these different characteristics, they all have their own different rules. And it's like a schema in our brain, or a roadmap. And this roadmap helps us to understand what's expected of us, how we should behave. So the problem is that our brain is a little bit lazy, shall we say. Danny Kahneman, who wrote Fast and Slow, he calls it our System 1 and System 2 thinking. So the brain likes to have everything in System 1 because the brain takes up to 20% of our energy. So it likes to use shortcuts like Control V or Control C on our keyboard. It makes life easy. And when the brain comes across something that's different, then it sounds an alarm bell. And the problem with this alarm bell is that it's saying to you that this is a possible threat. This is something I'm not familiar with. It takes time to learn new schemas. So when you're dealing with new clients from a different culture who operate in a different way, it takes a lot longer to adapt and understand how they work than you realize. And in the meantime, you have your brain saying, this is not normal, I don't like this, we need to get out of here. So what does the neuroscience say about when this happens? So it doesn't matter to your brain if it's a potential client or a T-Rex. As far as it's concerned, the signals that it's receiving is that according to the schema that it has, this is not normal behavior. And it reacts to your body. Maybe your heart's getting faster, you feel a little bit panicked because their way of communicating is a little bit different to yours, their way of persuading is a little bit different to yours, their way of giving feedback is a little different to yours. So why does that matter? Because when our brain sees that there's a possible threat, what it does is that it shuts off the blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. And it sends the blood to the motor cortex. So it wants you to get out of there. But the problem is that the prefrontal cortex is where all the magic happens. This is where we can have empathy. This is where we can regulate our emotions. This is where we can make decisions. This is where we can modulate fear. So when people talk about culture shock, and this is where this happens. It's because the brain is saying, no, 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 I don't like this. There's something wrong here. And what it does is it cuts you off from the ability to be able to connect with the very people who are really important to you right now. So empathy. One of the things that there's a lot of talk about empathy right now in social science. And particularly, I think we're all pretty weary, and the whole lockdown experience and the whole coronavirus experience has drained us, all of us. And you feel it and see it in your daily interaction. But empathy is about being there for somebody. And the conversations with empathy start with, I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? I know how you feel. How can I help? They do not start with at least. So my daughter her job has been furloughed in London, and she's all alone. Well, at least she'll still have a job. I'm not sure that I can cope much longer with this situation. Well, at least you're safe. So conversations like that get in the way of us building trust. The picture says it all. devices are another distraction when it comes to building empathy. And maybe not so much now because we're all using video and we're focused on the screen, but when we have meetings face to face, you don't realize people pick up very quickly whether or not you're focusing on them. So how does culture impact on this? So culture impacts on so many aspects of how we do business. One of them is communication, the second element. But communication has two elements. It's the rigor of our logic, but also how we communicate. I've drawn this triangle to show you that in the world of social science, we talk about high and low context. And high context is where we start off with a very elaborate story or the key concepts, and we work our way all the way down to the main point. This is considered to be really of value in certain cultures. But the problem is that if it's not considered to be of value, or how a good presentation should be done in the culture that you're talking to, then this can cause that disconnect in our triangle of trust. In low context cultures, it's all about getting straight to the point. The messages are succinct and repetition. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So this is a classic that for many years, particularly the Anglo-Saxons, would use in order to communicate. But the problem is that if you're dealing with a culture that values high context, then they will find that offensive because it's too direct, and they feel like you're actually insulting their intelligence. One of the anthropologists in social science, Edward E. Hall, he describes high and low context communication like a marriage. So what he says is that low context is like a newly married couple, and they have to state explicitly what's going on in order to make the other person understand what it is that they want to communicate. Whereas at the other end, it's like a couple who've been married for 40 years. So one raise of an eyebrow or a look, and they know exactly what's going on. And you see this particularly in the Asian cultures, in the Japanese, where there isn't a lot of body language. It's very, very subtle. So you can see even here that Ireland and Portugal, we're not on the same at the same level when it comes to communicating. And it doesn't matter where you are on this dimension. The important thing is to understand where you're starting from so that you can actually modify to connect. The last part of the triangle is authenticity, which is fantastic when you're with people who are like you. But when you're with people who are not like you, this can be a big problem. So, for example, how we give feedback. Even here, we are not exactly the same. We're close enough, but even that slight gap can cause a difference. So, for example, I'm going to share a story with you. My husband is German, and you can see where he is on the scale. And we were just newly married, and it was his birthday, the first year of and I bought him a present. We were living in Italy, so I bought him something, the latest fashion. I gave him the present. I was really excited about it. And I asked him, well, what do you think? And he said, I don't like it. I was absolutely gobsmacked or devastated. Because in Ireland, if somebody gives you a present, even though you don't like it, you would never say to them, I don't like it, because you wouldn't want to offend them. So obviously you can see there was a big learning curve there for both of us in terms of how we give feedback I was talking to a company who were working in Germany, and they had a team on site in Germany installing a new system. And he found himself constantly going to and fro, firefighting, because the team were clashing all the time. And what he said to me was, he said, Sharon, I should have spent time beforehand setting up the team, setting up the working relationship with them. Because what feedback looks like, what good quality feedback looks like for them, was very different to what his team expected. And that not only impacted the project, it created a huge amount of delay, it cost them a fortune, and eventually it did cost him his job. So here's a few tips on what you can do when it comes to building trust with your clients or also with your teams, because they're two similar but different strategies. So one of the things from my coaching background is I always reframing. It's looking at the same problem, but using different solutions. So what can you learn from their approach? Because their approach includes things like what good persuasion looks like. We've seen this, what feedback looks like, what good communication looks like. It also affects things like leadership. Do you have hierarchical leadership or do you have egalitarian leadership? Even things like decision making. So for example, Germany is quite a hierarchical country when it comes to leadership. However, consensus is really important to them. So generally when you have a culture that's quite hierarchical, the decision-making process can be much slower. But because they have this key value of consensus, it actually makes the decision process much longer. So what impact does that have on your sales cycle? What impact does that have on your when you have problems, or if you want to actually get them when they're implementing changes? Telling people what to do doesn't work. It just doesn't. And it's all about getting people, because that's the problem, what I found with, one of the reasons I became interested in all of this. There's a lot of books out there, there's a lot of research out there about cultural awareness, what the Germans do, what the Chinese do, what the Japanese do. But what about what you do? And understanding where you're starting from is really important, because culture clashes happen when you don't even understand what it is, what's important to you about decision making, what's important to you about communicating. And it's only when we're working or living in a different culture that we come face to face with ourselves, really. So it's about using questions to gain insight. And when you ask these questions, then people can develop strategies that are unique to them, to their personality, and to what's important to them. So here's another couple of strategies. I think that we tend to focus on the best case scenario, but scenario building is something that we can also use in managing relationships with our clients and customers. What would be the worst case scenario? What would happen if stepping into their shoes? One of the things that happens when we encounter cultural differences is that we go into this mindset of them and us. We become very judgmental. And once you're judgmental, then somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. Somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong. And that is not a place where you're going to build trust and meaningful relationships, be it with your team or with your clients. So another thing to be mindful of is language. I've only given you a couple of examples here. I speak Italian and German, and believe me, I have offended in in both languages. I haven't yet managed it in Portuguese because I don't speak enough. But even though you share the same language, it doesn't mean that the message is clear. So I mentioned to you earlier on that in Ireland, we would never say, I don't like the present. We tend to be a little bit indirect when it comes to giving negative feedback. So, and we're similar to the British. This is something taken from the Anglo British and Dutch, some research that was carried out. So we might say, could you consider some more options? What we really mean is, I don't like your idea. But what somebody from Holland will understand is they have not yet decided. Please think about that some more. What I really mean is, it's a bad idea, don't do it. But what the other person is hearing, it's a good idea, keep developing it. Because this is just an example, but in Holland, they're a lot more direct. So they take you at your word. They don't expect us to soften what we're saying. I'm sure it's my fault, but I'm really saying it's your fault. And what they hear is, it's their fault, or my fault in this case. So particularly for native English speakers, I think we're some of the worst for modifying our language. We make so many assumptions that because somebody speaks our language, the message is being received clearly, and that is not always the case. So I asked you to, I'm just going to come out of this for a moment. I asked you to write down in the chat a couple of your, sorry, I'm just trying to get back. Okay, what I'll do is, I'm going to come back to the question. I asked you to write a couple of what trust means to you. And the reason I did that is a very simple exercise. If you have a team, that's from different parts of the world, we often have a lot of assumptions about what leadership looks like, what feedback looks like, what success looks like. And a very simple tool that you can use with your team is to get them to fill in the spokes of the wheel and write keywords that success sounds like or looks like to them. Some people might say recognition, other people might say financial reward, other people might say security. So it's all about removing that judgment and understanding, having a shared vision and a shared understanding of what it is that you're talking about. So embracing other cultures and getting their perspective on what it means to them. And when you have that understanding, this is a great way of doing that in a non-judgmental way. So that's it. So I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight into where culture can impact on your ability to build trust. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And I'm just going to have a look at the chat and what you wrote. Sorry, I can't see the chat right now.
Good.
Okay. Sorry, I can't see the chat, so I don't know what you wrote in the square, in the chat box. Oh, here, right now, there you go.
You want me?
Okay, integrity, respect, okay, reliability, relationship, protection, knowing that you're not alone, relationship, confidence, belief. So even if you go back to the slide that we had about head over heart, so how you build trust is either using head is where you build trust by doing what you're saying, that you're reliable. And then you have the other end of it where it's all about relationships. So you can even see from the chat here that we all have a different idea of what trust looks like. So when very often, people, when we do something, and we talked about the customers leaving because in their opinion, in their view, you have broken their trust. And it's because we don't understand that trust. You think that you're doing the right thing depending on your cultural lens or cultural roadmap, but it could well be different to them. So that's all I have to say about about that. So has anybody got any questions?
Sharon, I myself put respect when you know we talk about trust. I mean, I've been living in different countries in Europe. I lived in Germany, in England, and now in Portugal. And I think that especially, you know, if you live in a country which is not your country, and you know everybody has their own culture, I think the first thing personally is to respect the other and respect the culture and understand the culture you live in, rather than trying to impose, you know, the way that you would see or experience things in your own country. I think the first rule is really respect for me, and with respect you build trust.
Okay. That's interesting. I think, you know, when I first started living abroad, there was no Irish community around me. So I think that when you're on your own, you very quickly learn, it's because it's easy to, you very often find, you know, when we have these expat communities, which are wonderful and very supportive, but it can lead us to that place of them and us, of being judgmental. And that creates barriers. And it's those discussions that you can have behind closed doors, or, you know, it's the Italians or the Germans or the Portuguese, and they do this and they do that. But respect comes from understanding their perspective and why they do things and how they do things. And I think that you get, you know, if you are respectful towards others, then they will be respectful towards you most of the time.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Deborah, you're on mute.
I have a question, Sharon. Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. One thing that you said that I agree with is about knowing your culture and the way you operationalize and work through things, and how your culture works when dealing with other cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like it's asking fish what is water.
There's a great,
you're so ingrained in it.
Yeah.
That how would you suggest to deal with that? You know, do you have any specific tips or any thoughts on that?
There's a great cartoon where you have two goldfish and they're in two separate bowls, and one says to the other, you know, what's the water like? And the other one says, what water?
Exactly.
So it's exactly that idea. Culture is about your values, what's important to you. And when people don't realize the differences, you know, and most of the time when people are doing business and they're traveling here and there, they don't really, you know, it's easier almost to manage the differences because you know you're only there for a short time and then you come back home again. But when you're working with people over a longer period of time, then this constant, you know, because obviously when you meet people and you're there to sign a contract and everything's fine, it's the stress, the difficulty happens when we start to see things from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand is what's important to you, what are your values? And if you know what's important to you, so for example, some people have said respect, protection, relationships. So if I'm on the spectrum of, you know, I build trust by showing you, and for you, having a sense of who I am and, you know, is more, that's how you build trust. Mm-hmm. So if you have people who are going to be working long-term, either in a multicultural team or who are going to be working abroad, you know, with clients coming to and from, I think a very important place one of the things that I would do with them is use what we call a value elicitation, whereas basically is get people to understand what's important to them. So I had an interesting experience with an Italian client. So they asked me to do some work, and I at the time I just did not have the time to do it. And I said, listen, I can't do this piece of work right now for you. and you're going to have to ask somebody else. And he came back to me and said, Sharon, we still want you to do it. And I said, but I told you that I couldn't do it, because for me, it's important to be realistic and also to be honest and say, I don't believe in saying to somebody, I can do things and then I can't. I don't, because, and this is the case that we often find in different cultures. But he came back to me and he said, Sharon, I still want you to do it. And I said, why? And he said, because no matter, even though you say you can't do it right now, I know that when you do it, you will do it. And you'll tell me exactly when you will be able to deliver. And that's what he valued about me. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that it's about, the one thing that living abroad or dealing with different cultures is that you actually learn more about yourself and who you are and what's important to you, more so than working in a monocultural environment.
Mm. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hello, Sharon. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Do you think that with all this the pandemic, it's going to change the way cultures deal with each other? Like there are some people, Portuguese like to give 2 kisses. Some English, no. The Asian, it's different for sure. So if there's already some changes or some differences, maybe with this, some cultures are going to have some, I'm not going to say problems, but to adapt even more with each other. Because,
yeah, I do. I agree with you. I think we're in a moment in history that has never been experienced before. And particularly for cultures where that relationship is really, really important. The problem with these virtual environments is that you're missing out on so much of body language. And in a lot of cultures, body language is really important. And particularly when they're very subtle. I think that none of us are prepared for this. But I believe that if you come from a place of empathy, and those 3 pillars, empathy, communication, and authenticity, I think it would help a lot. We all have to adapt right now. But people do adapt. If you think about it, when I was living in Italy, I was part of a very big German community. And at the beginning, you see these big German men shaking hands. So then at the end of a couple of years living in Italy, they're all kissing each other, which they would never have done and never do when they go back home to Germany. So people are amazing, and we have this amazing ability to adapt. And yes, it will be difficult, but I do believe that we will make those changes accordingly.
And with this via web, the camera, is there any advice that you give to any of us to how to react, how to communicate, use the hands, no, smile?
I spent years in Italy, wouldn't you? Because my hands go all the time. I haven't lost it yet. I think that you really need to pay a lot of attention to a lot more than before, because when you're in this environment, we're connecting, but we're not really connecting. One of the other things, particularly in coaching, that we learn is about listening, to what people are saying, but not what they're saying, but how they're saying. Because our voices also communicate a lot, whether or not I'm engaged with you, whether or not I trust you. So when somebody says, right, yeah, that's great, thanks very much, from the pitch or the tone of their voice whether or not they're engaged. So you can use things like voice to help you to understand whether or not people are engaged. I do believe that, if you're not speaking in your first language, that can be impacted. So, for example, I've been told that when I speak German, I sound like a child. So how... I'm not sure where that puts me at a professional level, but our voices do change, and also the intonation and the patterns change depending on the language that you're speaking. I think it complicates things a little bit, definitely. But I honestly believe that if you're coming from that place of, instead of being them and us, of being judgmental, and switching perspective and stepping into their shoes and doing things like the wheel, where you try and get an understand of their perspective. You know, if you have people on your team who are from those countries, talk to them, get an insight into, you know, what their understanding is of the culture.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
You're welcome.
A question. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning.
And all. As you know, I was in Africa, so it's a different culture and different approach. So in Africa, especially in Angola, we don't have this kind of attachments because we are hired to do our job. We are skilled and we are professionals, and they want us to do our project. They don't want to care. They don't care about who we are. Just the expertise where we are good at. Mm-hmm. Only that, because the relations we have with Africa, it's different. As you know, Portuguese and Angolans, so they have the history, like we said. So it's a different country, it's a different connection, and it's a different approach, a cultural mm-hmm. approach. So we have to detach the emotional, we have to be nice, we have to respect their culture, but we have especially to do our job. Yes. That's why we are there for that. If we want to mingle, we go to internations because we are expats. We were there for 10 years, 5 years, so we don't mingle a lot with the Angolans because it's difficult. And in the work environment, especially, because we have to really to show that we are there to make a better job. That's why we were hired. If not, they will hire only Angolans. So they don't like us to be there. So it's a different country. It's a different approach, and we have to be ready for that. It's different from Europe or different from going to any European country or other country. But I think expats have these problems with all the countries that you have in Italy, Germany, or sympathize or something like that. But in a work manner, it's not about confidence. It's about only showing your skills, and that's it. That's only that. They don't care. If you are nice, okay, but you have to do your job, just that. So it's different, as you can see. And I think it's the best way to deal with that environment, because it's very tough. It's very hard to work in African conditions. So that's completely different from the views from the other views from the other countries. Don't you think so?
I have no experience of the African cultures, I have to admit. It's interesting that, you know, I think that our history has a huge impact on our relationships with other countries. And obviously there is a history between Angola and Portugal. And there you can, from what you said, there seems to be a very clear division in how, you know, everybody knows how to work and how to function in that environment. So my question to you, Kashma, would be, what advice would you give to somebody going to Angola?
My first advice is, please don't comment their politics. Be like the monkey. You don't hear anything, you don't speak anything, you don't see anything. You just respect. It's the best way, and please don't question anything, because they don't want to hear your opinion. You're not in their, you're in a foreign land. It's not your country. You don't have to say anything about it, because you only respect and do your job. And that's the best way to deal and to live there, because it was, from my point of view, it was 4 years for me and 10 years for Luis. So it's the best way to deal with that. We just respect. If we agreed or not, it's not our job to do it, to say it, especially in Angolan environment, because we don't know who is the person next to us. It could be a secret service. It could be everyone has connections with everyone, so we don't know. They know our steps. They know everything we do. They know where we live. They know who we meet. They know everything. So we have to be careful because it's not it's not democratic. Yeah, we are foreigners.
Yes.
And we are all, they know us all because everyone knows. That's the main key. So be protected and be aware that it's not an easy country.
Yeah.
You have to be.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yes, you have to be aware.
It's a very, very different experience from going to work in France or America or Australia. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us, Fatima.
I also think that, you know, now that probably the way people are working will be different, that more people will work remotely. I think, you know, that intercultural relation will be even more important. People will be in the same team working in different continents, different countries. Yeah. And I think that will, you know, that subject is so important now. And also I think that a lot of people come to meetings or business meetings or in social meetings, they come a lot with preconceptions about who or what the culture of the country is. And I think it's important to go, you know, beyond those preconceptions and really understand, you know, who you are dealing with.
Yeah, I think stereotyping is something that we all do, and it's our brain. It's that, you know, Control V, Control C. It's that, you know, fast track, because we can only deal with so much new information, and we try to put people into little boxes so that we can figure out how we should deal with them. And it takes effort to step back from that and get to know the person. And I think in teams, particularly in remote teams and virtual teams, Marco commented on it a couple of weeks ago, it's spending time on those one-to-one conversations. It's setting up the team relationship, the ground rules. You know, we talk about culture, but culture can be organizational culture, it can be team culture, all of these things. So when you have a multicultural team working together, it's almost like saying, right, guys, we have the opportunity here to create our own culture. How do we want to interact as a team? What is appropriate? How do we give feedback? But it's so important to set that up at the very beginning, and it is so worth the effort, because when things do when there are moments of, you know, you said you do this, but you didn't deliver on time, and you say, you know, all of these issues that come into play, you can say, right, remember, this is what we agreed on. Do we need to revisit how the culture or the ground rules for our team, how can we improve on them? So you move it away from it's them and not us. Because as soon as you get into that mindset, as soon as you start saying it's the Germans or the French or the Italians, then you've lost it, and you're creating barriers that are very difficult to overcome. And it takes a strong leader to do that. And it also takes a strong team. And a team is as strong as all the individual parts. And if people feel respected and they don't feel like, oh, we're in Portugal, so that's the culture that we adopt and that's how we do business. I think it's saying to people, let's create our own rules, and let's not be pigeonholed into those typical stereotypes.
Yeah, I agree.
Sharon, this is Guillaume here. Hello. Just a question for you. Have you been exposed, or have you used at any point the work of Gert Hofstedt about a country comparison?
Yes.
Because it's something I've been kind of doing. So I don't have as much experience as you have, but I've been working in several countries, from the UK, Ireland, I'm in France, Luxembourg right now. And I feel it's very interesting to not go with stereotypes, but kind of plot at least how people are working on several aspects. So for instance, for Ireland and Portugal, one that strikes me a lot is, for instance, the uncertainty avoidance. So like Portugal has the magical score of 99 on 100, which means that there is a lot of uncertainty avoidance, which means that on projects, people will try to avoid as much as possible that something unexpected happens. When Ireland, we have 35, which means that basically in case of a problem, it's okay, we can turn it around. So I was wondering, because I kind of enjoy using the tool, but it doesn't seem to be that well known. So I was wondering if you used it and what was maybe your feedback about it and if it was useful for you.
I think what you said there is really true. There's a number of experts out there. You have Edward T. Hall, you have Tropinars, you have Hofstede, you have a more recent lady, Erin Myers. And what they do is they give us all these tools in order to look at cultures, to understand. You mentioned that Portugal is very risk averse and Ireland embraces risk. And obviously, how does that happen? It's to do with our history. And the impact for Portugal is things like, when I look at, where does Portugal export to, you'll see that they tend to go with the countries that, where they speak Portuguese, where there's, because they know how things work, there's a lower risk. These are tools. And remember that people are individuals, and even within a culture. So you have people who are low risk. So in Ireland, people are willing to take a chance. But at the same time, you'll also have people who are risk averse in Ireland. So this does not guarantee you that everybody in the country is going to be risk averse and everybody in the country is going to take risks. Yeah. So we're all individuals. So even, if this was only Irish people or only Portuguese, even within that group, you would have those differences in personality. So people, the great thing, these tools are amazing, and it just, and they all bring something to the table. But again, it's trying to say, you're Portuguese, therefore, or you're Irish, therefore you should be, willing to take a chance on this investment or take a chance on this project. But that's not necessarily the case, because it's about the individual as well. And so I think all of these things have to be taken on looked at in balance. They're frameworks, but that doesn't mean that we have to follow them exactly, or that we all fall into those boxes.
That's good. It's good indicators, yeah.
Yeah, they are. They are, and I think that that's what I don't like about those, is that it tells you, oh yeah, this is how they should behave. But what if they don't behave in that way? And it leaves you unprepared then in how to deal with them on a one-to-one.
Yeah, I think it's good in preparation. It's better to be prepared, but at the same time, not to come, as you were saying, with too much preconceptions. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to Ireland, I'm French, so French are like that, Irish are like that. And as a consequence, yes, but basically this person you've met has lived 30 years in the US and I've lived 10 years outside of France. So basically it's wrong. So you're right, I think it's good tools to prepare, but definitely not to kind of take as the Bible of the relationship.
I think they're great tools to use, like in scenario building. So if you're going after a particular client in a new market that you're not familiar with, these tools are great to kind of help you to brainstorm. Well, what kind of barriers can we anticipate, and how can we deal with them? And that's what they're useful for. They're not there to just say, right, this is how the Belgians are going to behave, and this is how, whatever.
True.
Sharon,
excellent.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I just have another question. The thing is, when we talk about preconception, is the difference between the countries, because, for instance, Angola is not a democratic country, but I work with several multinationals, and especially one from Finland. We were about 10 countries together, working in the same environment, with the same framework, and it was fantastic, because everyone knows we have a good relationship between countries. We were all together once a year. twice a year. It was really amazing, and in the best practice, working every day. So the difference for me is democratic countries and not democratic countries. That's the issue here for me, because it's very important to see the relation and to adapt. Because as you know, as a sociologist, I'm always open to add every country and every culture. But ones are more difficult than others. That's the key, and that's the way we have to see the environment and the framework, like you said, and we have to adapt and to realize that. Thank you.
That's very true, and I think that's why it's important to understand what's important to you, to understand where you're coming from, because when you start a journey, you know, and you need to get to a destination, in order to get there, you need to know where you're starting from, so that you can find the best route for you. But you see that all the time, you know, people who do business in the Arab world, where they have a very, you know, particularly for women, you know, it's a very different experience, and those kind of cultures where their values are so vastly different from ours. So how do you manage, how do you modify to connect with those cultures? So it has to be from an informed place where you're coming from. So I think a lot of people are starting to head off to the land of remote working.
Yeah, Elder, I would be interesting to hear from you, Elder, because, you know, I know you have been hiring people in Portugal, and also I think you work with Estonia in Eastern Europe as well. So, I don't know.
I was actually, I've hired here 2 foreigners, apart from working with a lot of them. Actually, we have offices in Dublin, in Belgrade, and in Portugal. So Portugal and Irish are a bit more similar than the Serbians, but I actually was not Estonia. I lived in Bulgaria for 4 years, lived in Australia. I lived in Ireland already, Sweden. And if you consider 3 months living as well, I've been almost all over the world, from Japan, America, Latin, the US, not that much, only 3 times. Yeah, I was listening carefully. I don't actually have many comments. I actually never encountered many difficulties dealing with other cultures. Not sure if I was lucky. Maybe it's the way I use a lot of humor. I try to break the ice, and it seems to work with everyone, to be honest. I mean, on the right setting, not on a meeting you arrive with other people. But the other thing I've noticed is being Portuguese, and that might be one of the items, makes you very neutral. So when people were talking about Angola, I had a project in Angola, started in 2001. So they were still at war, and I was going there a lot of times over the year. In other places, what you find is if you're Portuguese in, for instance, the Balkans, where you are in Bulgaria, I had responsible for Bulgaria, for, I forgot the names now, Macedonia, or Macedonia of the North now, and Albania. So I would never thought I would be living in Bulgaria 10 years ago. I would never thought going into Albania, but you start discussing with them those carefully, those issues, religious and political, not putting your ideas, but just probing. And by being Portuguese, they tell you everything, right? Because they find you neutral. So they kind of use you as a thing to tell bad things about themselves, about the others. So if you engage with them on the political and the social things without putting your own mark or being neutral, I think you get a lot of adventures as well. So that's the thing. I remember having conversations early in the days with guys from Lebanon. So when Optimus started here in Portugal, I was the responsible for starting the project. And a lot of guys from FTML, so France Telecom was here, and the mobile arm they had was from Lebanon. And I mean, they were Muslims, we were not Muslims. You can see working nights in a row with them. So the conversation starting about women and drinking and all those things. And at one point, I told them, it's not fair that you can have 7 women as a joke. And they said, no, it's very hard. You have to give the same thing to everyone. So only rich people can have it. It's not for, but you guys are much luckier here. Why? Because you can do it before marriage and we cannot. So, I mean, you start doing it. So, I mean, obviously this was a men's environment, but there's been everything. So I think engaging with people in a non-judgment way helps. I heard, I think it was Fatima saying, don't discuss it. I don't completely agree with that. Listen, open the doors to tell them what they think, because someone talked about the fish and the water. The first thing that happened to me, first time I actually traveled a bit more, was to Ireland. And just having the signs on the road saying, look left, look right. And a lot of things look different. The signs, I remember small details like the traffic lights having the flashing yellow. I wasn't in Portugal at the time anymore. So all those things, you need to be open to a new reality. I mean, don't take anything for granted and just open yourself without judgment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really insightful. Yeah.
Well, I think considering we are multicultural this morning, Belgium, French,
Yes.
Irish, Portuguese, it did go well.
We didn't fight.
I have just a small comment, because I don't want to go this webinar without saying anything. It's just for that. I have a question for Sharon. What do you feel? How long do you think it will take to cultures change the relationship between them? And this is based on a very simple experience. As you know, Spanish has this sense of superiority for Portuguese. And it's normal, it's been there for centuries, but there is a change at this time. Last year when I was in Madrid, I was speaking with a public institution, and I was very surprised to understand that they are actually very jealous for the way our economy is going, and especially the way our government was dealing with the fact that it was not a minority. And for once, I think I feel proud to be more proud than I normally am to be Portuguese in Spain, because they are actually changing the way they are seeing us. Because typically on business, the Spanish companies see Portugal as another province. The headquarters in Madrid, they have Catalonia, Galicia, and then they have Portugal. So we are seen as a part of Spain. But now this moment in time when Spanish people are looking to Portugal for a different way, I don't believe it will change anything, because in the long run, they will always have this sense of superiority. But how do you feel this pandemic, especially this pandemic, will change the vision that every culture have from the other one?
You know what, the one thing that has impressed me a huge amount is, because I'm Irish living in Portugal, I think that the Portuguese government have handled the situation here really well. I think that never before have we seen a moment in history when leadership has been more important. And you can see the quality of the leadership and the sense of we're in this together, that together we can get through this, and together we will overcome this virus. And you can see this playing out across in all of the countries around the world. You mentioned that Spain has, they're very arrogant, and, I'm Irish. So, we have a very, as my father used to say, we have 800 years, of British oppression. Was, he would come over to Italy and start talking to people who were from Britain. He would launch into his, version of history from the Irish perspective. And people, it's only when he started to explain to people about, whatever the Irish famine or whatever in our experience, they realized, oh my God, we didn't know that. And when you talk about Spain and they're very arrogant and whatever, we often say this about, people from France, but it's understanding their history. And I think that when you're in a country, you owe it to them to study a little bit and their history, because people, it gives us a sense of identity. It gives us a sense of who we are and what's important to us. And I think the people who don't take the time to learn that, or at least to study it a little bit, that they miss out on a lot. And at the moment with the pandemic, I think that, you can see where the countries that have that sense of empathy for each other, who have that sense of collectivism, because when you talk about culture, you have a very individualistic societies and you have collective societies. And individualistic societies, you can see that in America and what's happening there. And then you see in Europe, we're not as collective as in Asia, but we're not as individualistic as we have in America. So we have that sense of community. So I think nobody knows how this thing is going to pan out. But I think what it does show is a kind of, you know, how do we want to be moving forward as you know, as individuals and as nations. And I think it's going to draw a line in the sand as to what people expect and want. And they will want people who are, because this will not go away just by Italy or Portugal closing its borders. We all need each other. It's a global market. And countries doing just what's good for them, it's not okay anymore. It has to be a joint effort.
But that's the point. That's the reason why I asked, because this is not a problem that we can solve for our own.
No.
We have to trust each other, and we have to trust every other neighbor that we have. And this difference of culture and this changing on the concept that we have for other cultures or for other countries, if you want, may be different in the future because of this pandemic. Because we now we have. When I think of Spain, I have this history that we have behind. But when I think in, I don't know, Vietnam, I don't know them. So we are hearing now different informations from all over the world for the kind of attitude they are having for this pandemic situation. And we have different policies and different ideas. They are more or less conceptual or different, because in the United States and Brazil we have two kind of situations completely different from the Europeans, and we are considering what is the best, and they are not right, or you feel they are not right, but others think they are right. So there is a change of ideas that is completely different for whatever we have studied in history of and understand for this kind of cultures. So this difference, I think, will bring changes to the relations between countries, and especially between cultures. And we are a country that we are used to receive a lot of tourists. Understand that everybody has their own culture, and we respect it, and we try to embrace it and just feel them welcome. But after all of this, we need to consider how they will look at us. And this is the question: how will they look at us now, us as country? I'm not speaking up because look as Portugal, look at us as Irish or as Spanish in the world. The difference for the pandemic can be interesting to see in the next few years.
I think so. I think it's going to bring about a lot of changes. And, you know, it's either going to be, you know, hopefully they will be positive changes with the right people involved. We hope.
We hope.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it, no?
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for joining us. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
Thanks for the insight. Yeah, it's very good.
Don't forget
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sharon.
on Thursday, if you can join.
Thursday.
Thursday, yeah, at 9. Yeah, Thursday at 9:30.
Okay. See you then.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye. Take care.
Take care. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Arnold.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.